So we had this huge discussion yesterday about how the media has framed some Bernie supporters as sexist. And of course, that's been, a very dirty political trick by the Hillary Clinton campaign to make it seem as though Bernie Sanders is running some sort of sexist campaign. And so there was the debate where Hillary interrupted him and he said, let me speak. They interrupted each other. And people thought that his tone came off as sexist. I find it interesting that people criticize his tone because that got a lot of attention, right?
Yeah.
And a lot of people discussed it. But you know what didn't get discussed? When a Black Lives Matter activist approached Hillary Clinton and asked her, hey, what are you doing for the Black community? What are you doing for Black Lives Matter? And she was extremely dismissive in her tone with dealing with her and told her, well, why don't you go run for something? Why is it that, some media outlets, not mainstream media, Gawker is one of them, covered that story, but you don't have this national conversation about it, right? When we talk about tones, we don't talk about that.
So that's a great point. Let me add two things on top of that. One was in Minnesota that Anna's referring to. That's when Hillary Clinton thought she was definitely going to win, had already pivoted away from Bernie Sanders and started attacking the Republicans, and there were several articles written about that. And so I guess she felt a little bit more comfortable about being dismissive with this young African-American voter. And she said, oh, if that's how you feel, why don't you go vote, right?
Yeah.
And then, but right before that was in South Carolina when another young African-American female came out and challenged her at actually a fundraiser. And she was removed from the building. Mm-hmm. And instead of Hillary Clinton saying, wait, let me answer her question. Stop, hold on, don't throw her out. Or let me at least address it. She watched her get thrown out and then said, now let's go back to the issues. Okay?
Yeah.
So if you don't think African-American issues or mass incarceration is an issue, I can assure you that if Bernie Sanders had done that to an African-American, that would have been a massive story. Why is Bernie Sanders being dismissive?
Right.
And so I want you to understand the mechanics behind it a little bit, because this part you might not be privy to. There is a ton of operatives right now who know a lot of people in the media who are feeding them stories. So Lloyd Grove, in of all places, Daily Beast, wrote a great article about this that explained just a part of the puzzle, and I know a lot of the other parts of the puzzle from my previous experience. And so David Brock runs Hillary Clinton's super PAC. So what he tries to do, along with the other people working in that, is plant articles in the New York Times and Washington Post. Now, how do you do that? It's not to say that it's fixed. It's that they try to come up with an interesting angle that they think the press will cover. And they will spin it in whatever the facts are on the ground and feed it to the press. And a lot of times it won't work, right? And so that's why Lloyd Grove explained that they bought a liberal blog and turned it into a Hillary attack machine, right? And so in case those stories didn't get out, they would just print them themselves and put them online and hope that they take off. Now, Hillary Clinton has that attack machine. So if Bernie Sanders has any kind of misstep, they're sending press releases, hundreds, thousands of press releases. You got to cover this. Oh my God, look at what Bernie Sanders did, right? When Hillary Clinton does that, does Bernie Sanders have a similar attack machine? If he has an attack machine, and I'm not even sure about that, it is this big, right? It's nowhere near the size, the efficiency, and the experience that Hillary Clinton's political attack machine has. And by the way, you can give her credit for that and say, hey, that's politics well played. But that's part of why Hillary's gaffes and missteps aren't covered nearly as much as Bernie Sanders.
You're right, and there is a very specific strategy behind it, because also keep in mind that the Hillary camp perfectly primed the media to specifically look for sexist moments, right?
Yeah.
So they start with this false Bernie Bros narrative, sexist, and then all of a sudden everyone in the media is super sensitive to everything that Bernie says that might be perceived as sexist.
And then now let me
follow up real quick, just because what Anna said is such a good point, because again, you don't have to keep feeding the stories if you've primed them to look for it. So then when Bernie said ghetto, and I'm listening on the radio, and he said ghetto, and I went, Bernie.
Me too. Yeah.
And I thought maybe he'd get away with it because he's old and Jewish.
He's 100.
Right? And we had ghettos too.
Yeah.
Right?
And
I thought that might help. But it didn't. And it required, in fact, even Bernie's black supporters to, even Ben Jealous was like, that was framed poorly, but Bernie doesn't have an issue. And all these conversations, they're all dumb. Bernie's not a sexist. Bernie's not a racist. Those aren't real issues. They're not even vaguely real issues. So, all of that ends up frustrating me when we debate little policy issues, little things like that, when except for the big issues that we already know about, they're enormously similar policy-wise. Those big issues are enough for people to make a call in favor of Bernie Sanders.
Well, that attack machine has already won when we have to say Bernie's not sexist, Bernie's not racist. Because you frame the conversation as to whether that's a legitimate debate, but at the same time you say he's the most liberal, most progressive. He's so liberal, he's unrealistically liberal. So which one is it, right? But the reality is they hit him with everything they got. And now the crowning moment of that, as we're talking, a headline on CNN website comes up. Clinton, campaigns should be about results, not insults.
Yeah.
So they just have video of her. They don't have the rest of the article. So you'd have to get the whole context. It might mean something else. Maybe she means about Trump.
I think she's probably talking about the Republicans.
Right?
They
I
could
hope
say that,
so. But like this reads as
Bernie insulted her.